Yeah, well, okay, so basically, the how many is a very, very tough question to answer. And one of the things that I've learned in this whole process is that uh, there are two different kinds of people to talk to when you're talking about this term varieties.
Sure.
And some of the botanists, right, who like to go out there and study nature, and they can see differentiation between within a species, you know.
Hmm.
So there's a species of plant out there that may have multiple varieties, and they call those varieties. So that's variations within a species that they assign varieties to. That's the botanist.
Hmm.
Then there are the plant breeders. And the plant breeders they take a species that's cultivated and they develop varieties by breeding and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And they call those varieties as well. But they're not the
Okay.
same thing, right?
Right.
So actually, I have been convinced, and one of the challenges is they use different terms for it. So, for example, the botanists who study nature, they call subspecies varieties, and
Uh-huh.
they call ones that people have made, they call them cultivars or cultivated varieties.
Yeah.
The plant breeders, they call the ones that people make varieties, and they call the things that exist in nature land races.
Hmm.
So there's already a confusion around this issue. Are we talking about natural botanical varieties that exist in nature,
Hmm.
or are we talking about the ones that people make by cultivating them together?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so if you ask the botanists, the sort of leader on the botanical question
Hmm.
is this guy Aaron Davis,
Yeah.
who goes out there and he studies uh, Arabica species and I'm sorry, Coffea species and then Arabica varieties out there in the wild. And these guys tell us that there are thousands of varieties,
Yeah.
that most of which are undescribed, out there in Ethiopia
Hmm.
and places like that, maybe a few in South Sudan, etc. Now, all of the cultivated varieties, the cultivars, have descended there are a few that the Ethiopians have taken from the wild and are cultivating. And then there are a great number that people have developed over the years by sort of the inheritance of what was taken out of Ethiopia thousands of years ago.
Sure.
But remember that only a few plants were taken out of Ethiopia thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
So all of the varieties that we have outside of Ethiopia basically are descended from only a few plants.
Hmm.
And therefore, all the varieties that we've made, all the cultivars that we've made in the world, and that means, Typica and Bourbon and Caturra and Cadimor and Catuai and all those ones,
Yeah.
those are all descendants. They're
Uh-huh.
all very close cousins to one another.
Yeah.
So, so the question, and then the question, why are there so many? There are a few dozen cultivated varieties that people have made, that are commonly in use that people use, and then there are the thousands that have evolved naturally in East Africa.
Hmm.
And there are many, many, many varieties out there in the world. I mean, one thing that I learned as I was studying all this is we have a kind of apple in the United States called a Red Delicious, the standard
Sure.
red apple.
Yeah.
Okay, and you would think that that's one variety, one cultivar.
Yeah.
Actually,
You would. Yeah.
there's about 80 different cultivars that all make Red Delicious.
Okay.
So this whole thing, the entire seed industry is based on this kind of genetic variation. And to be honest, it's one of the most interesting things about food,
Yeah.
because
That's right.
because because, so variety is just the name that we call a identifiable piece of genetic information, basically, and how it manifests itself in an organism. Mm-hmm. And as that varies, that can affect the flavor of a plant, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why it's important for coffee as it is for all food. Right. So when you take two distinct varieties and breed them together, that they call that a hybrid. Mm-hmm. And there are many types of hybrids, Yeah. So here's where it gets technical, and where I want to make it clear is, as a lay person, this can get very confusing. Mm-hmm. The definitions for what is a hybrid, what is not a hybrid, et cetera, is something that plant breeders talk about all the time. And there are some very specific meanings for all this stuff that we need to be careful about when we're talking about it. But basically, if you want to think about it, you can think if you have two different cultivars, mm-hmm. one that's like, and you can bring them together and create a new one, and that's a hybrid.
Okay.
And that can be done sexually. Mm-hmm. That can happen spontaneously in your field, which is something that happens sometimes.
Okay.
Or it can be done intentionally in a lab somewhere, which is the way most hybrids are created now. So there's hybrids over here. Then there's also mutations. So a plant can have a descendant that's not a hybrid, that is different than its parents, and that we would sometimes call a mutation.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned one plant that is well known, SL28, which, by the way, the origins are somewhat murky mm-hmm. about that, exactly where it came from and who its parents are and stuff like that. There's conflicting information about that. To me, anyway. And then there are others, like one of the most famous ones, Caturra, is just one gene different from Bourbon. Mm-hmm. And it's nobody bred it at all. It just appeared spontaneously in a field.
Okay.
So and then there are also much more complicated hybrids, like, for example, the Castillo variety in Colombia, mm-hmm. which is very complicated. Lots of different parents got together to make that for very specific reasons. It's a good question. When people ask me questions about what's my favorite coffee, I always try to get out of that question by saying that's like asking a parent who their favorite child is.
That's a good answer.
To me, asking what your favorite variety is a little bit like asking what your favorite animal is. Mm-hmm. It's like you're not trying to say that one animal is objectively better than the other animals.
Yeah.
You're trying to say that there's something about that thing that speaks to you. Mm-hmm. And I think, for me, there's something about giant squids that I really like.
Okay.
I don't know why. I just like them. That's my favorite animal. But I'm not trying to say that a giant squid is objectively better
mm-hmm.
than a grizzly bear.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to have favorites, ones that you're sentimental about. You mentioned SL28. A lot of people are really passionate about that variety. I am too, because it's the only variety that I've ever experienced certain flavors from that I really like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Geisha, I think it's totally fair. That's a really distinctive variety. Maybe
but
other people
can taste really different in different origins.
Right.
And
Bourbon, there's a lot of people that are really passionate about Bourbon mm-hmm. because of its historical meaning. Like in El Salvador, Bourbon is part of the national identity, the national coffee identity. I think it's totally fair to be to be interested in that. So from that perspective, I think it's fair to have a favorite variety.
Great.
But as you said, all varieties are going to taste different varieties are dependent on their environment to express the traits that we want them to.
Sure.
So an SL28 grown at low altitude in Mexico is not likely, or even an SL28 grown at low altitude in Kenya doesn't taste like I think of a SL28 should taste.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Conversely, some coffee varieties that we think of being low quality, when grown at really high altitude under optimal conditions, can make amazing coffees and surprise people. So having a favorite, I think, is totally legitimate. But trying to do that thing where they say only, you can only get good coffee from these 6 varieties is preposterous.
Yeah.
And people try to say that. Have you ever seen the movie? What's it called? The one where they go to wine country.
I have. I
Yeah.
think I know what you're talking about, but I
And he hates
completely don't
Merlot.
understand. I don't remember the title.
Yeah, but the guy hates Merlot.
Yeah.
Is the point?
Yeah, definitely.
And he's really into Pinots, and he really hates Merlot.
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody in wine understands, though, that not all Merlots are terrible.
Yeah.
And not all Pinots are great.
Exactly.
But there's a tendency, and there's a tendency, this guy doesn't, if you averaged out all the Merlots he's tasted in his life, doesn't tend to be his favorite. He would not choose that. So in that sense, I think it's fair to have a favorite. I don't think it's smart to try to be exclusive about varieties, because they can always surprise you. I think that's a great question. I think that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to ask people like Shahan, because he has the system now to measure stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right, and that you're making an excellent point, which is that a lot of the coffee science that has been done has not been done to the level of detail that we think about in specialty coffee, And I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that Ethiopian Yirgacheffe coffees, for example, stay fresh a lot longer, keep their characteristics a lot longer than other coffees that I have.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that could be due to the variety. It could be due to the altitude that they're grown at, because we know that the cellular structure looks a lot different depending on the altitude the coffee is grown at.
Yeah.
And the cellular structure is going to have an impact on how fast that CO2 is able to leave the coffee. So that's one of the neatest things about people like Shahan and other scientists that are out there doing work.
Yeah.
Is that we can urge them to investigate interesting things, and when you interact with them, they're always really interested in engaging with coffee professionals, because they haven't been able to do that so much historically. And we're actually just now getting to the place where we can do that, where there's places like, for example, I run a symposium where actually Shahan spoke and talked about exactly the work you're talking about. And the reason that we've set up that symposium is so that guys like Shahan, scientists like Shahan, can talk to people like me and people like you, coffee buyers, coffee professionals, and we can get the answers that we're really interested in figuring out. Of course, right now, when it comes to cultivars, though, the main thing that people are concerned about is resistance to disease, because that's the main problem, and resistance to climate change. Because those are the 2 major issues facing us today. Sadly, freshness comes down a little bit on the list when you're looking at those big existential questions. Well, so it does affect coffee. Some of the ways that it does is it makes as you said, the climate is increasing, not decreasing, and so that means that the quality, that you have to grow coffee higher up to get the same kind of quality. and mountains are shaped like triangles.
Yeah.
So the farther up you go on the mountain, the less land area there is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem. There are very few places in the world, and they've done the modeling on this. If you increase the global average temperature 1 degree, suddenly the amount of land that's available for coffee growing shrinks.
Yeah.
And so it's a big issue. So what we need is varieties that are climate resistant, that are disease resistant. So there are two problems at low altitudes that coffee has, or warm. Let's not say warm low altitudes. Let's say warm environments that coffee has. One problem is that the quality isn't as good. So acidity is reduced, sweetness is reduced, aromatics are reduced.
Yeah.
And then the second problem is that they're more susceptible to disease at low temperature, at higher temperatures, especially rust. So you can have a single farm, and the rust on warm parts of the farm, rust is really bad. On cooler parts of the farm, rust is not even there. Yep. So to answer both of these, improved varieties will help a lot. Mm-hmm. So of all the diversity of varieties that is out there, there's not a lot of good data about what varieties are good at relatively higher temperatures and what varieties need really low temperatures. So that's why World Coffee Research has this project, and it's called the Multi-Location Variety Trials. And they're growing the same group of, I think it's 37 different varieties in like 50 locations around the world that are all different. Some are high altitude, some are low altitude, some are warm, some are cool, some are wet, some are dry. And then they've already planted these coffees, and so now they're looking at their behavior over the next few years, and we'll be able to identify the ones that not only perform well from a disease and productivity standpoint, but also from a quality standpoint.
Okay.
And that's why that work is critical, absolutely critical. Mm-hmm. And we're late starting,
Oh yeah.
I mean, we should have been doing this work years ago, but the good news is that now technology is such that it allows us to do it faster. So that's good, and so it's happening. That's why supporting World Coffee Research is so important for people to do, and that because that's what it is. It's there to do the research on these sorts of questions and ask exactly the kind of questions that you and I are asking in our conversation, and then get answers for them so that we can make good decisions going forward.
Sure.
That is a great question, because there's some other bad news besides coffee growing in Asia. The coffee industry growing in Asia. Coffee. At my recent conference, there was another guy from the International Coffee Organization, Mauricio Galindo, that was saying, who pointed out that only Vietnam and Brazil consistently make coffee profitably. Okay. On average, Kenya, Guatemala, et cetera, are actually losing money at coffee. If you take their whole economy as a whole,
that would actually make sense.
Means what's that?
That would actually make sense, would it?
Yeah, it totally makes sense, but it's totally horrible news.
No, it is. Yeah.
Because all the specialty produced, some specialty is produced in Brazil. Almost none is produced in Vietnam. But that means all the places that we look to for specialty coffee are on average losing money. Mm-hmm. So what happens when they're losing money is farmers are disinterested, they get out of the business. And that's exactly what's been happening in Costa Rica and Panama and places like that. So not only is the consumption growing, but production of specialty coffee is decreasing.
Yeah.
So your question, what are we going to be drinking in 10 years? It's hard. We'll be drinking a lot more Brazilian coffee, that's for sure.
I believe so, yeah.
Coffee will be much more expensive, That's also for sure. So what we now think is, what is now, green $2.50 or $3 a pound will be $5, $6, $7 a pound. Green.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's a horrible thing, though.
No, it's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I talk about when I talk about this is, inexpensive coffee is a function of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Coffee was a luxury before the 20th century.
Right.
For 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now about to become a luxury again.
Mm-hmm.
So in 10 years, whatever we'll be drinking, I hope that a lot of the same coffees that we love are still around. I still think that there will be Kenyan auction lots and, Yirgacheffe coffees and Wewe Tenangos from Guatemala and all those great coffees. I think they'll just be super expensive. That there will be, and it seems like you are thinking this way too, that increasingly there'll be more Brazilian, interesting coffees from Brazil. People growing special varieties or doing special preparations in Brazil to add more diversity from that country. Yeah, I agree with that. I think we will be, whether we like it or not, drinking more Brazilian coffee.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important for us to increase our commitment. We all continue to buy, no matter what we've talked about for the past 15 years, we continue to buy coffee too cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to get wrapped up in, these nuances about, details of stuff and ignore the bigger, more difficult problems that are behind every cup of coffee that we have,
Sure.
And I just don't think we can afford to do that anymore,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to live in a world where Brazil is amazing and there's incredible potential there, but I don't want to live in the world where they're the only option.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons,
Sure.
Not just for flavor reasons, but also for cultural reasons, one of the things I like most about coffee is it teaches you about different cultures,
Exactly.
And I know about, the culture of central Kenya because of coffee. I know about the northern Indonesian culture. The Gayo people I know about because of coffee,
Yeah.
And I don't want to lose that aspect of what coffee is, is that coffee makes us more connected to the world.
Yeah.
And I think that makes us better people. And that's why I think that preserving the diversity of coffee origin, I think, is important for that reason. And before the 20th century, it was expensive.
Okay.
Like expensive. I don't have a number to give you, but it's something like, $10 a cup kind of thing. Yeah, it's stuff like that. It's like, and that was also a time, everything was different then, where certain, people didn't have access, and people would drink coffee very differently in those days, by the way.
Yeah.
A European coffee house was a very, very different environment than now. But even in the early 20th century, coffee was a lot more expensive than it is today.
Okay.
I was looking at a old photograph that had a picture, of a menu in the 40s in a train station or something, and a steak, a cup of coffee was $1.50 and a steak was $2.50.
Okay.
And so now do the math. A steak
Yeah.
now costs you $20. So so so
That's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
There's all these articles all the time in the newspapers about how expensive coffee has gotten, but really it's very cheap and
It is.
ahistorically cheap. I still think of myself as a barista. And one thing I remember being a barista is people's first cup of coffee in a day, they don't want to hear shit.
Yeah. True.
They want you to be nice. They want you to smile and give it to them, and that's all.
Yeah.
If they could be in bed and you pour it into their mouth, that would make them happy. They don't care about it. It can come from a K-cup machine, but it's the second cup of coffee that they have that it starts. Then they're curious. Their imagination has been stimulated, etc. And we need to do a better job at distinguishing those two things for people. And I think that's a great way to do it, to say, look, if you just want a cup of coffee, that's great. I'm not going to hassle you about it.
Yeah.
But if you want to have an experience and an exploration and stuff like that, go over here.
Yeah.
And we can do it. I think that's a very smart way to do it, yeah. That hurts my feelings too, because I know hundreds of especially coffee people, and to describe them as joy thieves is the opposite of what they are. These are people that are living joyfully through coffee and are trying to share their joy of coffee, and but after I get over my hurt feelings, I try to think about what they're trying to say, and what they're really trying to say is, man, do you have to make this so complicated for me?
Yeah.
Exactly. I used to just enjoy it and not think about it, and now you've made it like so complicated, and I don't need another complicated thing. And I think that's true too.
Yep.
I feel a similar way sometimes about culinary stuff. I mean, particularly now that I have kids and my life is so complicated, I used to really, really enjoy going out to really sophisticated restaurants, but now it feels exhausting to put myself through that intellectual exercise,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to turn my brain off and have somebody give me nice food and smile while they do it, I don't want to be intellectually challenged. Right now, at this stage of my life, I don't want to be intellectually challenged by cuisine, whereas 5 years ago, that was my favorite thing to do. So, and I think it's connected to what we were just talking about, which is I don't think that we as coffee professionals are always as sensitive as we should be to what place people are at when they're coming to us, And we get so enthusiastic about how we've gotten turned on by coffee, we forget that the people we serve aren't there yet.
Yeah.
And some of them will never get there, And those people expect us to just be quiet and give them their cappuccino, and that's all.
Yeah.
And it's sad and it hurts sometimes to do that, but we've got to be humble about that too.
Yeah, we definitely do.
And so I think it pisses me off when I see articles about that, but I know that there's a point in there somewhere, which is sometimes we forget how to be simple and unassuming and humble about coffee in our enthusiasm to turn people onto it. So that's what I think about it. Okay, I will.
So have a good day.
Thanks, brother.